Forget. Otherwise, I'll start talking and forget to hit record. Welcome to the afternoon session, the evening, the last session of the day, whatever it's called. This is Johan. He's going to talk to you about stuff. It's on the screen behind me. Read it after I move. That's what the session's all about. If you stick around to the end, we're going to give away a cool puzzle, 1,000-piece puzzle of Lego faces. It'll be a swag it thing. You don't have to know that until the end. Take it away, Johan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, right? I'm between this session and beer for you. So, but given we have a full room here, we are going to talk about Teams rooms, best practices and notes from the field, mainly my personal experiences. But I'm open if you have something to say, feel free, right? Because we are all here to learn. So my name is Johan Dalleman. I come from Belgium. I'm a 10+ years MVP. You'll see all the details on this slide here. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to run through a little history, where we come from, because Teams rooms sounds very new, right? But we have a long history. I have to talk about Windows versus Android, because things have changed, and sometimes it's a pain, and we have to talk about that. Also cable management, because we want to have clean rooms, right? We don't want to have messy tables with all cables running over it. How do we manage it? Operational troubleshooting and some adoption, but that's really, really small. So let's first begin with Teams rooms. So who remembers linked room systems? Like, can I see some hands? Okay, so almost half, so that means we still have younger people in the room as well, right? So this goes back to, I think, 2010 days. So Microsoft did have linked room systems. Well, actually, they were not Microsoft purpose-built room systems. No, there were other vendors, and Microsoft had an operating system, and it ran the link room system, right? So it was not something that Microsoft did, but that was kind of, let's say, version 1. We had, in the older days, OCS stuff that connected to meetings as well, but that was like vendor-specific. Now, after that, Microsoft, because, well, there's an important fact here, like the link room systems were kind of expensive because they were built like on the old way of working and all the other devices, so it was kind of like 15K plus, probably. So Microsoft decided, let's do something else because that's too expensive. We want to do a new thing. So Microsoft decided we'll try to use everything that's within the room and hook it up to our meeting room, right? So we have a computing unit, and we plug all USB devices into this unit, and we may have a display, or we may have not. We may have a beamer, which we connect. So this is called V2. So that was Skype Room System V2. And if you compare the prices, it was kind of maybe divided by 4 or 5, so it's much more cheaper, and so it got much more wide adoption. Of course, then we moved on, because Teams was there, so Microsoft had to do something about the naming, so it was named Skype Teams Room System. It was still the same thing, right? Still the same thing. And then, of course, we moved on to Teams, so we had to rename again, which is still the same system, right? So it's not something new. It's been running for years, right? And then something else happened. Microsoft decided, oh, this is interesting, but still maybe we can do something different as well. And then Microsoft came up with collaboration bars, right? Any one of you use the collaboration bars? Yeah. Well, it was version 1, right? Or I would say version 1 of collaboration bars, which was essentially version 3 of link room systems, Skype room systems, Teams room systems. We come a long way. And then, of course, Microsoft had to do something about the naming, because with Teams room systems and collaboration bars, it doesn't make sense, right? So we make an easy name, Microsoft Teams Rooms Systems on Windows and on Android, which is for me more confusing, but I don't know about you. But anyway, it means we have Microsoft Teams Rooms on Windows and Android. I'm not sure what the future is going to bring for both of these versions, but let's see. So this is an example. I'm not showing all of the examples here, but you see Microsoft Teams rooms on Windows. We have like the bigger rooms, for example. We have multiple speakers, multiple mics, maybe multiple cameras. So we can go to bigger rooms. The collaboration bars, at first, it was the first iteration which had like an audio-video piece, but they were not together, right? It was still USB connected, which was not optimal. I had a lot of issues with it. Did you guys have that too? Like updating the audio device gave some issues there. So luckily, we decided let's move on to Teams rooms on Android, which had the integrated experience, like compute, audio, video, speakers, all in one device, which is easy to deploy, right? And it's far more easier to manage. So we've come a long way. And I see this being deployed now mostly at customers today. So it's an easy to deploy all-in-one solution, and potentially you can hook up extension mics and maybe a center of table device to manage your meeting. So for example, the center of table device is the Logitech TAP, which comes in 3 flavors, USB, Cat5 over Ethernet, and then an IP version which you can hook up to your switches. And then an interesting part is here, like on the right you see Teams rooms on Windows, which you can essentially convert to an Android-based version with this piece of hardware, which is called the Logitech Roommate. So if you now have like a big estate and you all want to manage your rooms the same way, then potentially you can use this device to actually transform this into an Android device. So we've come a long way, and I'm specifically talking about this because what do you mean Android? Microsoft doesn't make Android, right? It's from Google. So why does Microsoft use Android? And I don't really know, but if you look at all of the devices coming out now, or for a few years, all of them run Android. Like we have the IP phones, the displays, the panels, and the meeting rooms. So it seems like everything is moving to Android. Android is very different from Windows, right? We have different things to think about. This is something extra. I wanted to show you this because this is interesting because customers ask me, well, now I have a big fancy room, but it runs on Teams, right? I want to join Google Meetings or something, or Facebook, or whatever. Now you can use this device, which actually hooks up to all of your components. So essentially all your USB devices connect to this switch. And the interesting thing is you hook it up to your computer, and then your room is like a peripheral on your PC. So that means your entire room can be used by your computer to join meetings. Like that's awesome. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't only work with Logitech, because I have at home, I have a Poly room as well. I connect it to the switch. It just works. Like, it's really interesting. So, Windows versus Android. Because I imagine you guys have run into issues as well. So let's see. First of all, there is a difference between Windows rooms on Windows and Android. So this is not the current comparison, but it was like a while ago. So for example, what kind of meetings can you join? On Windows, you can join Teams and Skype for Business. On Android, you can only join Teams meetings. So what is important for your enterprise? You have to choose wisely, right? What else? Let's see. In the beginning, we didn't have like high definition video. It was kind of like more for smaller rooms, up to medium, which is kind of changing now. What else? So HDMI input. In the beginning, it was not there. It wasn't the roadmap. It's still a little bit flaky, but it's going to get there. Custom branding is potentially also possible, an important one, because currently it's still not the same thing about branding your MTRs on Android. So this is actually the current comparison from March 2022. And for example, you're seeing most of the things are available and some of them are coming soon. Well, it's not the entire list because I have to strip out a lot of things because it doesn't fit on the slide. But for example, chat bubbles, pin multiple participants are coming soon. But there's an important one, like coordinated meetings with Surface Hub. Anyone using that? Yeah, just a few. Well, you cannot do that on the Android platform. You have to use the Windows platform for that. So coordinate meeting join means you have an MTR and you have, for example, a Surface Hub, and you click join meeting, your MTR joins the meeting, and it tells the Surface Hub to join the meeting as well as a whiteboard. So audio and video disabled. It's really interesting. It's kind of expensive because Surface Hub is really expensive, but it works really, really well. So what else is important? Like, okay, we see Windows, we see Android 8.1 Plus, which is important. I will come back to that. And then, for example, if you see small, medium, large, it's available. I would say large. It kind of depends on your room. I would still use maybe Windows, but multi-purpose, really large rooms will be Windows, right? So there is still a difference between those platforms. And you'll see the link below. You can find all the details there. So the importance is the difference in architecture, right? We have either Windows 10 IoT, which comes default, or you can install Enterprise Edition. And on the other hand, we have Android versions 8.1, 9, and 10. I'll repeat, 8.1, 9, and 10, like really old versions of Android. And there's a reason for that. And I'll explain later in some slides. We need device administrator to manage these devices. So the way that we update Android versus Windows is very different. Like on the Windows platform, we update every night. I think at 2:30, there's a script that runs, or at 2 o'clock, there's a script that runs and updates all the drivers, all the firmware, well, maybe not the firmware, but all the Windows applications, all the Windows components, and it reboots every night. So that's an important fact. It reboots every night. So on the Android platform, it's very different because you manage the updates via the admin portal, and you just push them whenever you want, or you can schedule them. So also on the Windows platform, we have kiosk mode auto login. So when this device starts up, it automatically logs into the Skype account. It's still called the Skype account. That won't change, I guess. And there's the blank password, which is not too important because you cannot actually do something in the kiosk mode. It doesn't, you cannot run any other applications. But you see, it's very different how you manage those things. Also important, certainly for Android, is enrollment restrictions, conditional access, compliance policies, all of those things. We have to create separate policies for that. And I'll dive a little bit down into that. I just want to mention the Android version history, just to have an idea how old are those versions. Like you see, some of the displays and maybe also the meeting rooms are still running Android 8.1, which is from 2017. It's important for your IT organization and your security department, right? What version do you want to support? It kind of depends on the vendor, right? But there are still devices out there that run those versions, like 9 and 10, primarily 9 and 10. Those are also almost 3 years old. Now, why is this? Because the Android piece requires device administrator to be able to be managed, which is not supported on any device that runs 10 or higher, but 10 is kind of like something in the middle. I don't know the details about it, but it's still required. I know Microsoft is working on trying to fix that because at some point we have to upgrade the Android versions because we cannot stick with those older Android versions, right? But Google is clearly saying those things like okay, we're going to move away from device administrator. So in the later versions, you don't have this ability anymore. So there's a link, like, if you want to know about the details about that. Now, I do want to talk about some of the effects I've seen in actual real deployments. For example, the enrollment restrictions. Like, if you boot up an Android device and you want to log in with your room account, how are you going to register this to your Intune environment, your Microsoft 365 environment? Is it allowed? So the funny thing is, of course, like, we all have mobile phones and we want to secure that environment really, really well, which is great because for security, that's what we want to do. But then on the other hand, we are using Android on those MTRs, phones, devices. Well, and that probably is going to conflict, right? So we have to make sure that we are making sure that we can actually use those devices. So for example, we have Android device administrator in the enrollment policies that we actually allow or block, right? So for example, we have to allow this for the Android devices on the rooms, and also the phones and all the other devices. So here you can see Android device administrator on the bottom. So we have to allow it, and you have to be very careful here because you can have potential existing policies that say, I want a minimum version of Android or a maximum version. And I've seen companies put in here like 11 is the minimum version. Like, no way you're going to get those Android devices connected, right? So you have to do this here, or most likely you have to create a different policy for that. And then you can actually filter it down on devices. Like, if you have a specific policy, you can actually say, okay, this only works for these kind of devices. And then you're kind of filtering into the room devices, for example. So this is an important step, like 1, enrollment restrictions. Other things, conditional access and compliance policies. So for example, do we want to have MFA enabled for our meeting room accounts? Probably not, or who is going to accept the MFA prompts? I certainly don't want to do this at night, right? So make sure that all your conditional access policies don't intervene between whatever you do when logging into a room account. So you probably have a different policy there for room accounts, right? You have probably a group where you put all the devices in, and then you apply a different policy, or you exempt the rooms from all of those policies. Now, on the other hand, we have compliance policies that check devices, right? And of course, they can bite you as well. So in this case, we do have an Android policy for IP phones, meeting rooms, and some other stuff. And it's best to do it this way, right? Because we will trigger ourselves. Now, the compliance policies, because of some Android versions, platform things, we cannot just enable or disable everything we want, because that will break whatever is happening with the MTR. So there are just some basic settings that you can set, and mainly it is like rooted device, then we're going to block, and we need company portal. That's kind of basically it, right? But you filter down on device types. Now, other things is like many organizations don't allow you to bring just any device. But what happens when you bring a meeting room? It's kind of like just any device, because how are we going to manage this? In some scenarios, you just have to add that to the corporate devices, and there's a way to do that. So in role devices, you have a list of serial numbers, which you can add to this list. And then when you log onto the system, it will recognize this and be tagged as a corporate device. So you have to make sure that you add it this way. It's a manual thing, but okay, it still works. And then you have to make sure that the device ownership is configured as corporate. At some point, I had to also do this manually, so I'm not sure if it always works automatically. So also an important fact here. And then, like you see, this is the Logitech Rally bar. You see, this is running operating system Android 10. So we just have to be aware of those little quirks for Android. So any questions for those Android thingies? Okay, I think we're good. Okay, up to the next section. So we're going to talk about cabling, right? Because we want to have it like managed neatly. So I use Logitech a lot, but you have other vendors as well. But you see, like this is kind of like a large room. But how many cables do you see here? Like how many components do you see here? Like that's really a lot, right? You have a table hub that goes on the table, a tab that goes on the table, the PC either on the table or behind the screen, the display hub behind the screen, you have the speakers and the camera.
That's without the switch.
That's without the switch. I do have a design drawing with the switch as well.
It was on the slide there.
Oh, you saw it? Ah, damn it. So, but you have two options. Like either the PC is on this side, behind the screen or in a closet or something, or it is on the table side. So we have two options, but you see how many cables are going back and forth. Just have to make sure that they are hidden correctly. This is the second option, like put the PC underneath the table, and then it's kind of from cabling perspective easier because you just run one cable and it's just get six. So it's kind of a little bit easier. Now I have some screenshots. So this is all behind the screen, so it doesn't really matter, the user doesn't see it, but you see how many devices and cables and whatever that we have in place here. It's a lot, right? So you have to make sure that it's hidden from the user. And then what we see over here is this is actually underneath the table, because we're running the microphones and then the tab and running all the cables underneath the table. Like also a lot of cables over there. But in the end, it needs to look clean. Like we don't see any cables here, and the user shouldn't be confused. So we have to tuck it away and make sure that it's all clean. So let's talk about management. So Microsoft has a way to do your own monitoring for those MTRs. Now, I won't say this is easy, and I will say this is just limited to Windows, because it requires Azure monitoring services. But then it's still a lot of work. Like, it's probably too much work to do it yourself. That's why Microsoft decided, okay, let's do something neat here. Room standard versus premium. The standard is just a license to use it as a room. The premium is that Microsoft is going to manage that room for you, with an additional price tag, of course. So this is kind of the only commercial slide I'll have in my deck about this managed meeting room service. So expert management, like 24/7, 365 monitoring, proactive security, enhanced insights, and you name it. So there's quite a bit in here. Now the only downside is, and maybe Michael can comment on that, Android is not really part of it today. So we're kind of stuck anyway, but no, it's there and it's coming, right? Now, in general, how would we manage those systems? Yeah, of course, we have the cloud, and of course, we have the Teams Admin Center. Now, everything has moved into the Teams Admin Center, and we can manage all of our devices that way. So what can we do? Like performance statistics, configuration settings. We can restart the devices, get the logs. And then for the Android pieces, we can actually update the firmware as well. So this is kind of how it looks like. This is a list of all our MTRs, different manufacturers. And then it's going to say, like, is it healthy or not? Which is really what you want to see, right? If a system is not healthy, you want to see it. So things you can do is like download the device logs, restart. You can see the status online, and then overall activity, the health, which is important, and I'll have some other health screenshots as well. what are the versions of the admin agents, operating system, and so on, what is the activity, and what is the history that we did with those devices. Like we can push software updates, and it will have an activity list, or download logs, and will be in the activity list. So we can also set these settings on the device. So there's an example for a Windows device. So we can say either Skype meetings, Teams meetings, both of them, in which order, and then it will be pushed to the MTR, which is really interesting because in the old days you had to connect to the MTR locally or send an XML file. XML files kind of messy to work with, so now it's all integrated. That's really easy. So this is an interesting piece because we have the health of a Windows machine here, like a Windows MTR, and we can see all of the devices, the peripherals, like the compute, camera, content camera, speaker, microphone, display, are those connected and healthy, right? We see, okay, in this case, 2 are disconnected, so this is a critical event. We have to watch this. So potentially something is going on here. We have to watch this. So the same thing for an Android MTR. It's a little bit more limited, but there's a difference here. We see all the agents and the portal apps, and for example, we also see the firmware. So for Android, we can actually push firmware updates from the admin portal, which is not the case for Windows, right? So that's also important. You manage it differently. So for example, if you have a firmware update, you can just push it or schedule it. That's all integrated into the interface. And then same way about the settings. Now, while the Teams Admin Center is great, it doesn't have all the features, right? And while all vendors have their own portal, I kind of work with both because they both lack features. So you kind of run both the vendor management portals in coexistence with your Teams Admin Center, just to be able to manage everything. So we have Logitech, I think Yearling, Poly, all of them have their own management portals. And for example, those management portals would probably also have like analytics insights, like how well is the room used, which is not part of the admin center. Now, an interesting fact about MTR is that, certainly on Windows, well, we can connect into it remotely, like with remote desktop, for example. But remote desktop has some limitations, which I will show you. I usually use another tool, which actually runs from my PC. I connect to the MTR remotely, and I get the full screen, and I can interact with this device remotely. I can even join meetings if I want to remotely, just clicking join. But that's not the point of this session, of course. So we can go into the settings and change everything we want. But most of the settings are pushed through the admin portal, but not all of them. Like resetting a password is not via the admin portal. I don't know why. So that's important. And another thing is, of course, on the Windows platform, we have to update the drivers. That's not part of the maintenance that happens every night. You have to do this manually. So you have to connect the device or go up to the device locally and then download the drivers and install them. Now, some of the drivers you can install via RDP, but some of them won't install. For example, this is a specific driver, I'm not sure, display driver. If you do it through RDP, it will fail to recognize the actual hardware through another application, in this case Protection Networks. It will find this driver and you can update remotely, which saves you a lot of time, right? Because if you have MTRs all over the world, it will save you a lot of time. So all in all, I would say the rooms on Android have much more integrated admin experience in the admin portal than the Windows version has, because of the firmware updates and the drivers and all of that stuff. So it's just something to think about. If we talk about custom teams, Like you want to have your own wallpaper. Like this is on Windows. It's still not available on Android. You can have the center of table display show another background, but that's not really what you want. So adding custom themes involves like sending an XML file, which is kind of messy, and you cannot do it through the interface, right? It only works through the XML file, but yeah, it is what it is. For a one-screen background, you will need to put the actual content on the right, which is confusing, but that's the way it is, right? So far so good. So let's talk about operations and troubleshooting. So this is what we actually see at customers. So what do we need to do? Of course, we need to make sure that the rooms get updated, right? Also firmware updates, and you know it's different on Windows than on Android. It's very important. We have the Teams Admin Center, and of course we have Intune that potentially can block stuff, and so on. But what I see a lot of customers do actually is they do walk-in rooms. So every morning they go to the rooms and check whether the room is healthy. You can say, well, you can see it in the admin portal. Not always. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. So they walk the rooms and maybe have to restart the devices because sometimes the display doesn't come up, for example. And I see this happening a lot. I have a separate slide on that. So what they actually do is walk into the room and potentially look at, like, are there any cables that are loose? Because in many companies, the tables are maybe not so big, and the cables running under the table get people hit them with their foot or something. So they walk the rooms and look at every room, but they have to do it every morning. It's kind of tricky. So what else can happen? The device account cannot sign into Microsoft Teams. So the trick is, let's try in a browser whether we can log on, and maybe some policies are preventing us from logging on, and maybe MFA is enabled. You'll be able to see it. Maybe the password is not correct anymore, and maybe when you log an MTR from Windows into an Active Directory, you won't automatically boot up into the console, right? Then you have to make sure that auto logon is enabled again. So see this here. So then we have to go into the registry in order to enable auto logon again, and we have to make sure that policies are not preventing us from this setting to be removed. And make sure the Skype account has a blank password. It's really important. And also the register information has a blank password, right? So these are things I see happen in real life. Now this is kind of the most annoying piece of problem I see at customers. Now it's still, this is primarily on Windows. I see like people walk into a room and the MTR doesn't really wake up, or the display doesn't wake up. So, and it seems that this is related to CEC, which is kind of a nasty feature. It's supposed to be some sort of an international standard, consumer electronics control or something, but apparently it's like SIP in the old days, right? We have a standard, but everyone uses it differently. Apparently it's the same with TVs and displays. So the CEC doesn't always work the way you want to, and then we're kind of stuck. So there are workarounds to do that. Then you can actually buy additional hardware from Extron or Crestron, I think, and then they send a different signal to your TV. Now, they're not really cheap. I would say you have to pay a little bit of money, so it's not something you want to do, right? But I see some people or customers actually configure their TV like never go to sleep, which is not good for the environment, but is good for the meeting experience, right? So last part, I'm talking about adoption. which is a small part. We do have all the trainings available here, some videos, some demos. We have the customer success kit, the Teams toolkit, and success with Teams. But more importantly, for adoption, what I see at customers, this is really what they want because it helps their users really a lot. So in-room signage, I always do this with customers and they're really happy about this. And even, it's just a one-pager, right? It's easy and simple, but it's important to have this. So adoption is much more evolved when you do this. So there are two different examples here. So I came to the end of my session, and I leave some room for some questions. Yeah.
So configuring a kind of multi-purpose room, a bit like this room, where you're going to be doing kind of town hall type meetings and potentially training.
Does it have to repeat the question?
So just saying, configuring a room like this, where you're going to be delivering potentially town hall sessions or training sessions, where you really want to look at a camera at the back or a camera at the front. Any advice from the field on kind of the best way to configure that environment?
I've seen two options there. I don't remember the actual vendor, but there are USB solutions with multiple cameras, which you can configure for Teams rooms. Well, it's just USB connected. You can hook it up to a Windows MTR. What I've also done with multiple cameras, so I can choose one looking at the presenter, one looking at the room, and maybe add some other. I don't know how many you can actually put there. But the other interesting case is with another customer, and we ordered 3 different Windows Room devices, MTRs, and then they all work together with coordinated join. And then they only have, or one has audio and video enabled, and the other only have video enabled. And this way you can actually combine a lot of MTRs together. The coordinated join is really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Next question.
Hi there. So Windows on Android, a lot of the Windows Teams rooms on Android stuff is really new and really great and developing really fast. But now it's built on a platform that's really old. So is there, I mean, how should we prepare? I'm assuming that there's a plan for this. Microsoft will move from what you called it, device administrator, to Google Enterprise, whatever it was. But does that mean there'll be a lot of manual updating to the existing Android systems if we're expecting their life expectancy to be 3 to 5 years? Some of them are already on an operating system that's 5 years old. So by the end of its life cycle, potentially it's a 10-year-old operating system, which is clearly not acceptable. So, I mean, I know it's hard to say because Michael's glaring at me, and so are the Logitech people.
Well, I tend to look at Michael too for this question.
So on Android, most of the vendors, including Logitech and the others, so go back a little. The chipsets used are usually by Qualcomm, and they have to be able to support later versions of Android. So if you buy a mobile phone even from 4 years ago, it has Qualcomm release support for Android 12 or 13. So if you look at these chipsets that are out there, some of them currently Qualcomm hasn't released anything beyond 10. So most every one of the vendors I've talked to, most of their devices are going to head to 10, which will now give us another 3 years into the future. So, and then as new devices come out, they're upgradable. Some think they can get to 11. Some think they can get to 12. You have to deal with each vendor individually, which means when you start buying Android devices, don't just buy based off price or features, based off what chipset is inside there, and then look and see how far Qualcomm has already certified that chipset. The other part is some of these devices take a lot longer to develop than mobile phones, so they will almost always release with an older chipset. That's just the reality of the development.
Management through the admin portal, if that's relying on something that's no longer in...
So the management of the admin portal, there's an app on Android that Microsoft writes, the admin agent. So long as the admin agent will work in a secure way, we'll continue to push them out. The other part is just because, and it's up to you as a company, just because Android support has ended and security patches are no longer being shipped does not mean the product is going to quit working. Right? Because like Windows XP still works.
All right.
More questions?
It's not, Windows XP, to be clear, isn't supported.
Internet Explorer.
It's not recorded. The mic didn't catch it.
Forgot to record.
Right, yeah.
Do we have another question?
Anyone else? Anyone? Bueller? I'm glad more than one person laughed at that.
So I guess it's trivia time. Or
All right. Well, I mean, we got time. We got time for a couple more questions. What questions did they forget to ask?
future?
They're just ready for the swag-it. Oh, got a question. All right, everyone get your swag-its out while we get the question.
Out of the box. I have a question. So it was quite painfully apparent to a lot of the people that installed this stuff up front that Android and Windows had quite a big differentiator in feature sets, and they were kind of developed by different teams. Maybe this is a question for Michael again. Is all of this stuff being drawn together now? Because the Surface Hub Teams client and the Windows Teams client and the Android Teams client, they're all subtly different, and it confuses the hell out of users, let alone the vendors. So is anybody tying these big ball of string together? Well, you ask some more questions, you know.
By the way, hi, I'm Mike Trusser, an architect at Microsoft, but not an engineer on the team. So I don't design these things. I just train how to use them. So there's a history, right? So as he pointed out nicely on his slides, Skype Room System was written, and that was a whole different code base. And then Teams came out, and instead of just trashing all that, we added a Teams client. So today, trivia, the homepage on Teams Rooms is still the Skype system client. Okay, that's flipping soon. Hashtag spoiler alert. But you envision at some point we'll go fully Teams native on Teams Rooms, right? So that is a whole separate code base of legacy. Android is basically a branch off the Android mobile client on the phone, which means, so it is a different code base, and it's Android, which is a different code base than Windows. But if you understand Teams, there's a common code base underneath, and then we basically extrapolate it using Electron or whatever to different operating systems. Surface Hub redid their legacy hand-coded Teams client to be the Teams modern client, which is essentially the same thing as the Teams Windows client, which is roughly the same thing as the Teams Android client, meaning Teams Room Surface is very much modern, Teams Room's Android is very much modern. Teams Room Surface is probably, on Surface Hub, is probably the most modern because Android came out first. Long story short, all of that is starting to move to the same modern Teams platform within the extensions. And the ultimate goal is, and the Surface Hub already has it, is that as features get released on Teams Desktop, at the cloud level, the service level, we can just flip a switch and enable the feature. Currently today, well, about a year ago, whenever a new feature came out, we had to code something on Teams Rooms Windows. It was like separate coding. If you've noticed a lot of changes to the UI, subtly or not, that's because it's now starting to become more of the modern Teams client. So to your question, yes, more things are coming. Things will come at different paces for Android and Windows for many reasons. Windows has a legacy, it's got all the drivers, it's got all the support, it can support 1 trillion things. A lot of times Android, we have to write drivers, we have to write on Android to support a feature. Like the Android operating system was not originally designed to be a shared conference room system, it was meant to be an individual phone system. So sometimes we have to wait for things to come to Android. So there will always be some divergence, but the ultimate goal is they will be so minimal that you, the customer, can choose what is right for your environment unless we need this feature. Good answer. All right.
That's good job killing time.
Well, I would say one question I have in mind would be like, is there still a future for rooms on Windows? Like, that's my personal question to myself, I would say. But maybe it's just philosophical, right?
I can answer that question. Maybe.
It depends, right?
I'm a consultant.
So that just cost $200?
I'm a voluntold today, so. All right, so I assume that you all stuck around because you are really excited about this amazing puzzle. I told him if he could bore enough people to leave, then I would get to keep it. But my wife also told me I didn't have room in my suitcase for it, so. Swagit, swagit.io on your mobile device. If you're ready for the number, it is 2287. 2287. If you've already won a prize, get out. It's Legos. It's all the little faces. You know you want it. Swagit.io. The number is 2287. We're 31 people. 34? Should be about right. No, 35. Anyone else? Hurry, hurry, hurry. Anyone else? Are we done waiting? All right, I'm going to push the button in 3, 2, 1, go. Now let's look at everybody's names while it tries to think.
So how does this work? Is there a random selection?
Yeah, it's random, but it takes forever because it can't just pick one. It has to think about all of them. Dutch Viking all the way in the back. Catch.
Start.
It's in a bag. Congratulations. Oh, I'm standing in front of the microphone.
So thank you all. Thank you, Michael.